He laughed, loud, careless, the kind of laugh that turns heads and digs under your skin. "You sure that's how the bishop moves?" Mark sneered, his voice thick with condescension. A few people chuckled, the kind of uneasy laughter that says more about the crowd than the joke, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just stared at the board, then made her move, quiet, clean, precise. One last push. "Checkmate," she said, almost gently. The words seemed to echo across the grass. Silence fell over the picnic. Chips stopped crunching, soda cans paused mid-air. Mark's grin collapsed. He leaned in, scanning the board like it had betrayed him. A woman near the lemonade cooler whispered, "What did she just do?" No one answered. No one could. Because they had all watched her sit down 20 minutes earlier in a faded flannel shirt and worn sneakers, looking more like someone's lost cousin than a chess player. Because they had all heard Mark joke about giving her a warm-up round, assuming she couldn't tell a rook from a pawn. And now they were watching him sink into that fold-out chair like he'd been hit by a truck made of strategy and silence. Eleanor didn't gloat. She didn't explain. She stood up, brushed a leaf off her jeans, and reached for her sandwich. That was it. No lecture, no mic drop. Just the win. Just that one move that cracked the smug little circle open. And it all began the moment she stepped over the edge of the picnic blanket, sandwich box in hand. She showed up 15 minutes after the opening game had started, walking down the slope of the park like she'd taken a wrong turn on the way to the grocery store. A reusable canvas bag hanging off one shoulder, her jeans slightly dusty at the knees, her shirt untucked, wrinkled like it had dried on a hanger and been forgotten. And those white canvas shoes, creased, weathered, the kind that had seen rainstorms and long walks to bus stops, the kind that didn't care what brand they were, only that they still held together, and she wore them without apology, just like she wore that soft, steady look in her eyes, calm like a quiet lake, but with something moving deep underneath it. She paused at the edge of the group, squinting against the sunlight that broke through the oaks, scanning the tables, spotting the board with the real players, the ones with roll-up mats and timers, the ones talking fast and nodding like professors grading each other mid-sentence. She didn't say a word at first, just stepped forward slowly, careful not to step on any loose pieces that might have fallen in the grass. And that's when he saw her. Mark, tall, pressed polo shirt tucked too tight, wristwatch gleaming like it had something to prove, sitting like the board belonged to him, the audience his entourage, the park his stage. He looked up, did the quick up and down, that flicker of judgment sharpened by years of winning small games in small circles. "Chess isn't the same as Uno," he said, not looking at her so much as through her, the kind of line thrown out to remind everyone else who belonged here. "You might be looking for the picnic group over there?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She gave a half smile, not mockery, not deference, just that half curve of a mouth that says she's heard worse and doesn't need to play along. "I came to watch a bit," she said, voice light. Midwestern maybe, warm enough to be friendly, flat enough not to invite more questions. Mark raised an eyebrow like she'd offered him a paper plate at a dinner party. Someone else chuckled. No one moved to make room. She stayed standing, eyes fixed on the game board, like it was a painting she'd already memorized. The bishop was misaligned, the knight poorly positioned for what Mark clearly thought was an aggressive defense, and that, right there, was when something changed. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't gasp or lean in or make a show. She just kept standing, kept looking, and for a moment too brief to notice, her fingers twitched, once, like they remembered a move from long ago. But no one saw that. Not yet. Not then. All they saw was a quiet woman in the wrong shoes, standing too close to a game they thought she couldn't possibly understand. She didn't sit, didn't ask, didn't fidget or check her phone like so many others did when they felt out of place. She simply stayed there, still, a question wrapped in calm, waiting to be underestimated. She sat down on the lowest folding chair, the kind that wobbled a little if you shifted your weight wrong, the kind no one ever chose first. And maybe that was the point. Maybe that's why she picked it, and for a moment, the group barely noticed until someone, a younger guy with a volunteer tag and a clipboard, glanced around and said, they needed one more player to even things out. His voice casual but uncertain, like he knew this might go sideways. Then Mark leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest, like a man about to witness a minor tragedy, and grinned wide enough for the people behind him to hear it. "Let her play. Why not?" he said, looking at no one and everyone. "We'll finish quick, break for snacks early." And that drew a few chuckles, the kind that come easy when people expect nothing from someone. A woman in a sun hat nudged her friend, already holding up a phone, whispering too loudly, "Get a shot of this. It'll be cute." And someone else added, "Make sure you delete it after. Poor thing's gonna regret sitting down." Eleanor didn't seem to hear any of it, or maybe she did and just didn't care, because what she did next was so ordinary it was almost invisible. She reached forward and began arranging the chess pieces, straightening them without fuss, aligning the pawns, fixing a knight that had tipped slightly, like she was brushing dust off a memory she'd kept in her back pocket. Mark didn't rush. He made a show of checking his watch, stretching his fingers like this was the warm-up before the real game, then hit the timer with a little too much flair and opened with a center pawn, fast and loud, the kind of move meant to say, "I've done this 1,000 times." And Eleanor followed, quick but quiet, sliding a piece with 2 fingers, no wasted motion, no pause, no noise. That caught him off guard just a second, just enough for his brow to twitch, and then it was gone, replaced with a smirk and a louder tone. "Nice, she knows how the horsey moves." Which got a few laughs, too easy, too cheap, the kind that turned people into spectators instead of participants. But Eleanor still didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't defend. She just nodded slightly and waited, and the game went on. Move after move, she matched him, not flashy, not aggressive, but solid, methodical. And there was something about it, something unsettling in how comfortable she looked, how relaxed her shoulders were, while his started to tighten. He cracked his knuckles louder than necessary, leaned in too close to the board, began tapping his knee under the table. Not enough for most to notice, but if you were watching, really watching, you'd see it. Around them, the mood shifted slightly, not enough to name, but enough to feel, like when clouds start to gather and you're not sure if it's shade or a storm. A teenager holding a soda stopped sipping mid-slurp, tilting her head, squinting at the board like something didn't add up. Mark tried to break the rhythm, tossed out another jab. "You know, if you get stuck, just Google the next move." But this time, no one laughed, not even the phone girls. Eleanor responded with a move that trapped one of his bishops. Not reckless, not lucky, just correct. And he knew it. His jaw tightened, the kind of tight that makes a man suddenly remember other moments when things slipped out of control. She didn't gloat. She didn't lean in or raise an eyebrow or even look at him. She just adjusted the sleeve of her shirt like she had somewhere better to be. And still, she didn't say a word. Someone from behind muttered, "Wait, is she, like, good?" And someone else whispered, "What's her name again?" But nobody answered because nobody had asked before. To them, she'd just been that lady who wandered in from the edge of the picnic. But now, something was happening that didn't fit the script. A couple of people stopped recording. A few leaned closer. The jokes got quieter. Mark took longer with his next move, scratched his chin, stared at the board too long. He moved a rook. She responded instantly. He blinked. A man with glasses frowned and leaned to his friend. She just turned that defense into a pin, and suddenly more eyes were watching, not laughing, not smirking, watching. Eleanor didn't look up. She didn't need to. The shift was already happening, not in her words, not in some grand declaration, but in every small decision on that checkered field. The joke had stopped being funny, and Mark had started to sweat. He tugged at his collar, glanced at the crowd, then back at the board, like maybe the pieces had betrayed him, like maybe this wasn't supposed to happen in front of everyone, but it was, and Eleanor just waited, steady as ever, eyes calm, hands still, letting the silence say everything she didn't need to. The wind picked up a little as Eleanor pressed her fingers against the next pawn, moved it forward 2 squares, and hit the clock without even glancing up. 8 seconds. Mark stared at the board like it had betrayed him, reached for his knight, hesitated, then moved it out wide. She responded instantly, sliding her bishop into position, classic, clean, not aggressive, but undeniably deliberate. 10 seconds. Someone at the edge of the group exhaled sharply, a sound you wouldn't notice unless you were really listening. 5 moves in, and Mark's brow had drawn into a crease, not deep yet, but enough to say something wasn't going to plan. That's when a man sitting cross-legged on a blanket leaned toward the guy next to him and murmured, "Is that the Rue Lopez?" His friend shrugged, eyes locked on the game, then slowly nodded. Yeah, old school opening. Not many people know how to use it right anymore. The murmur started to ripple, soft but growing, and someone pulled out their phone again, not to record this time, but to look something up. Across the way, a college student sketching trees in a spiral notebook turned toward the game, her pencil still in hand. She watched a few moves, then leaned to a friend and asked, "Did you see how she transitioned into that defense? That's sharp." Her voice was quiet, but curious, the kind of curiosity that spreads fast. Eleanor, for her part, didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't even blink too much. She adjusted one of the pawns that had slid slightly off-center, pressed the base into the board like it mattered that everything stayed where it belonged, and then moved again, quick, precise. Another blow to Mark's control. By now, he wasn't smiling. He shifted in his seat, glanced around, clearly trying to shake off the pressure, but it was there, clinging to his collar and his watch and every word he wasn't saying. He made another move, rushed this time, pushed a pawn that opened up a weak square. Eleanor didn't take it right away. She waited, then trapped his knight with her bishop 3 turns later, like she'd seen that mistake coming before he made it. That was when the whispers changed. No more jokes, no more smirks, just questions. Who is she? Where'd she learn to play like that? Why haven't I seen her at the regional tournaments? A retired professor leaned in close and squinted through bifocals. That's not instinct, he said, mostly to himself. That's memory, trained, polished, tucked away maybe, but never lost. Mark glanced at him, hearing it, and his hands twitched slightly. The timer clicked. His turn. He stalled. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The silence around them deepened, but Eleanor didn't move, didn't prod, just waited, hands folded under the table now, as if she had all the time in the world. He finally pushed his queen forward, trying to bait her into a bad trade. She didn't bite. She shifted her rook across the board, perfectly placed to control the center. Mark swore under his breath. "Jesus!" someone whispered from the back, not in mockery this time, but awe. The student with the sketchbook started flipping pages, scribbling quick lines beside the drawings of branches and birds, notations now, symbols and arrows, trying to capture the pattern before it slipped away. She looked at her friend and asked, "Do you think she played competitively before?" Her friend shrugged. If she didn't, someone wasted a damn genius. By now, even the people passing by had slowed down. A dad carrying a toddler stopped, turned to look. A woman with a thermos tilted her sunglasses down. Nobody was eating anymore. Eleanor made another move, castle-side defense, neatly done, and Mark cursed again, this time louder. She looked up just once, just briefly, and their eyes met. Not hostile, not smug, just clear. Mark looked away first. "I'm sorry, but who invited her?" someone finally asked, half laughing, half serious. A man in a vest replied, "I don't think she was invited." Another added, "She just walked in." "No," the first one said, shaking his head slowly. "She didn't just walk in. She walked in like she already knew how it would end." Another round passed, tight and fast. Eleanor tightened the noose around the center, took control of the lanes, and Mark was left chasing pieces instead of building pressure. He leaned forward, both elbows on the table now, posture changed, defenses up. But it was too late for that. The tide had shifted, not just on the board, but in the air around them. Respect, slow, heavy, undeniable, was building, and no one could stop it. She moved again, knight to f5. A soft sound from the professor, almost a chuckle. "That's tournament play," he said, like it hurt to admit. "That's the kind of move you don't try unless you know what you're doing." Eleanor didn't react, just hit the clock and waited. Mark looked around, searching for an ally, a joke, anything to regain his footing, but found nothing but stares, mostly quiet, some confused, others impressed. No one was laughing now. He pushed his bishop. She sacrificed her rook, a collective gasp, then silence again. She was setting him up piece by piece, like someone building a house on land everyone else had called unplayable, and she was almost done. A man from the back, holding a clipboard from the tournament tent, finally leaned forward and asked the only question that seemed to matter anymore. "Excuse me," he said, cautious, like someone poking a sleeping lion. "What's your name?" Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't look up. She just moved her queen one square forward and clicked the clock. That was all. And somehow, it said everything. Mark made his next move too fast, too loud, and too proud, sliding his bishop into a position he thought would put pressure on her king. But he missed something. Something small, something fatal, and Eleanor didn't even blink before punishing it. She captured the bishop with her queen, and that wasn't just a counter, that was a message. The board tilted in her favor like a table with one leg shorter than the others, and Mark knew it, felt it, but couldn't stop it. He tapped the clock, a little harder now, and his fingers hovered over the board longer than they should have. She pressed her advantage with quiet confidence, advancing her pawns with military precision, not aggressive, just inevitable, like water rising under a locked door. Mark shifted in his seat again, legs twitching now, hands clasped tighter, jaw clenched so hard you could almost hear it. Eleanor brought out her rook and pinned one of his knights, then moved her queen in behind it, a classic pincer. And now she was forcing him to move defensively every turn, scrambling to delay what couldn't be stopped. People were leaning in closer, some with arms crossed, others with hands over their mouths, like watching a building sway before it falls. She took another pawn, then baited him with a sacrifice that looked like a mistake until 3 moves later, when it turned into a trap. He fell for it, and when he did, she didn't smirk, didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't look pleased. She just moved her queen forward again, checked his king, forced a narrow escape, and then on the next turn, locked him in. 3 more moves, and it was over. Checkmate. She said it softly, but it rang louder than a shout. Mark stared at the board, eyes darting like he was hoping a piece might have moved itself while no one was looking. Nobody clapped, nobody dared. The wind stilled, or maybe it only felt that way. Even the trees seemed to hush. One of the older men, gray-bearded and sunburnt from sitting too long near the grill, stepped forward and squinted through his smudged lenses. "That pattern," he said, half to himself, half to anyone who might remember. "That finish, I saw it once years ago, at the National High School Finals. Eleanor Grant, right? You were that kid from Boston. MIT chess team, class of '09. A few people turned to look at him, then at her. Eleanor blinked once, no expression, just nodded slightly. Mark opened his mouth like he was about to say something clever or dismissive, but nothing came out. The organizer walked over slowly, clipboard still in hand, eyes wide like someone had just realized they'd invited a tiger to a petting zoo. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "next time, maybe let us know who you are before the game." His tone was light, joking, but the sweat on his neck said otherwise. Eleanor looked up finally, and her voice came out calm and even. "Would it have made a difference?" That shut everyone up again. The crowd shuffled a little, unsure what to do, unsure what they'd just seen. A woman with a baby stepped forward, phone still in her hand, but now the camera was down, recording nothing. She whispered, not really asking, more like thinking out loud. "Why did she stop playing?" Someone else said, "Maybe she never stopped. Maybe we just weren't looking." Mark stood up slowly, the legs of his chair scraping against the grass like a protest. He looked around, then down at Eleanor, who was already packing her pieces back into a cloth pouch, smooth, careful, precise, like she did this every day, like she had never stopped. He cleared his throat, wiped his palms on his khakis, and finally spoke. "You played well," he said. It came out flat, forced, but it was all he had. Eleanor smiled, small and polite, and said, "So did you. Until you didn't." That one landed. A few people coughed, others turned away, pretending not to smile. The girl with the sketchbook whispered, "Savage," under her breath. The professor laughed, the kind of laugh that came from years of watching people learn the hard way. The wind picked up again, gently now, rustling leaves and cooling the air that had turned sharp with silence. Eleanor stood, adjusted the strap of her bag, and glanced back at the board one last time. "Maybe I'll come next week," she said, more to herself than anyone else. No one stopped her. No one asked her to explain. She walked off toward the tree line, quiet steps on dry grass, and left a room full of open air and open mouths behind her. Someone finally muttered, "That was brutal." Another replied, "That was art." A third voice, deeper, older, almost reverent, added, "That was history." As she faded from view, a boy around 12 turned to his father and said, I want to play like her. The father nodded, still stunned, and muttered, "Then you better learn how to lose first." Near the picnic tables, the organizer shook his head slowly and looked down at his list of names, none of which had ever warned him about this. The man with the clipboard took out a pen and, without saying a word, wrote her name in the margin. Eleanor Grant, just in case. Behind him, people began speaking again, slowly, awkwardly, the way a classroom does when the guest speaker leaves and no one knows if they should applaud or apologize. A teenage boy who had filmed the game watched the screen in silence, then hit delete. It didn't feel right to keep it. Others just stood there, replaying the game in their heads, trying to remember every move, every shift, every quiet moment that had built to something impossible. And in all that stillness, the chessboard remained exactly where it was. One king tipped, one queen towering over the field, and a silence that would outlast the afternoon. No one touched the board, not for a long time. Eventually, a small girl wandered up and looked at it. She asked her mom what had happened. The mother knelt down and whispered something soft, something about respect and patience and never assuming. The girl nodded, her eyes wide. A group of teens from a nearby table began setting up another game, but quieter now, more thoughtful, taking their time with each piece, glancing occasionally at the empty chair Eleanor had left behind. A woman in her 40s stood alone for a moment longer, watching the trees sway, then took out her phone and searched Eleanor's name. She stared at the search results. An old interview, a blurred photo, a headline about a forgotten prodigy, and saved the page without a word. In the distance, Eleanor disappeared beyond the trees, and the sound of the world resumed, but not quite the same as before. Not quite. A younger man in a chess club t-shirt approached the professor and asked, "Was she really that good?" The professor didn't answer right away. He just looked down at the board again and finally said, "She still is." Not far from them, two girls who had never played before pulled out a chess app on a phone and started learning the rules together. Someone had opened a thermos of coffee but forgotten to pour. The moment held everything: defeat, revelation, awe, and none of it was loud. In the quiet, something bigger than the game had shifted. You couldn't name it, but you could feel it. Mark stood there a second too long, unsure if the handshake would be returned, his pride still tangled somewhere between his fingers and the grass. But Eleanor met his hand with a firm, steady grip. No hesitation, just enough pressure to say this moment mattered, and then she let go, light as breath. "You played very well," he said again, quieter this time, less for her and more for himself. "Sorry I was a bit dismissive earlier." Eleanor gave him a look that wasn't quite forgiveness and wasn't quite pity, just a quiet kind of knowing. "It's fine," she said, with a shrug so small it felt practiced. "I'm used to it." She turned to leave, but the small crowd that had formed was still there, blocking her path. No longer spectators, but students, curious, softened, different than before. A young woman in a hoodie stepped forward, her sketchpad tucked under one arm, her voice careful, respectful. "Do you teach?" she asked. "Like, online or anything? I've been trying to get into chess, but it's hard to find someone who doesn't treat you like you're stupid if you don't already know." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, then smiled. Real this time, not for defense or distance, but because something in the girl's tone reminded her of herself, long ago. "Sometimes," she said, "when I have time." That was enough. The girl beamed like she'd been given permission to try again. Someone else asked if she was on YouTube. Another asked for her username. Eleanor didn't answer all of them. She just nodded politely, the kind of nod that gives hope without promise, and moved past them, headed toward her picnic blanket like nothing had changed, though everything had. As she walked, the voices behind her softened, then turned into conversations. Not about who won, but about how she played, what it meant, what they could learn. One man pulled his son aside and whispered something, then pointed at the board still sitting in the grass. The boy looked at it like it was more than wood in pieces now. At the edge of the field, the woman with the baby stopped Eleanor with a gentle tap on the shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said. "Just thank you for showing my daughter something real today." Eleanor didn't say anything. She just looked down at the baby, then back at the mother, and nodded again. The kind of nod you give when there's nothing more to say, but it still matters that you were seen. Back at the tables, a few of the regulars had begun arguing over the order of the moves, piecing together the sequence like a mystery they were desperate to solve. Someone had drawn the final board on a napkin, using coins for pieces. A group of teenagers sat in a circle around it, debating which move had turned the tide. The organizer stood nearby, still holding his clipboard like a shield, watching it all unfold with the vague, stunned expression of a man who knew he'd witnessed something he didn't quite deserve to be part of. "She said she might come back next week," he muttered, and suddenly people were talking about clearing schedules, moving games earlier, inviting friends. The picnic had become a memory already, still happening, but already drifting into story. At the edge of the grass, a boy in a bright red cap turned to his older sister and whispered, "I didn't think people like her played chess." The sister answered without looking away from Eleanor, "That's because most people don't look close enough." A college student pulled out her phone and searched Eleanor's name, then gasped softly. "She used to be famous, like really famous. What happened to her?" Nobody answered, but nobody asked if it mattered, because here, now, what mattered was the look on Mark's face, softer than before, stripped of his usual grin, and the way the others glanced at each other before setting up the next board, more careful, more open, more aware. What mattered was that a room full of strangers had just been reminded what quiet strength looked like. Eleanor reached her blanket, knelt down, and pulled a sandwich from her cooler like it was any other Saturday, unwrapped it with slow hands, took a bite, and looked out at the trees. Behind her, the world kept moving, but gentler now, slower, like something invisible had shifted. Not a lesson, not a lecture, just a moment, earned not by noise, but by action. And everyone had seen it. As she chewed, a young girl wandered up and sat beside her without a word, just watching the trees the way Eleanor did. No questions, no fanfare, just quiet, just presence. And in that stillness, a seed of something lasting began to grow. They posted it late that night, a quiet thread buried beneath tactics talk and old tournament memes. No profile photo, no signature quote, just a throwaway username and a few lines that felt heavier than most things on that forum ever did. "She didn't say much," the post began. "Didn't bring a clock, no jacket, no patch, no team. She looked like someone's aunt who stopped by with extra lemonade. But the way she played," that sentence sat on its own. No flourish, no need. The kid went on. "We thought it'd be funny. I even whispered to my friend that she'd last 10 moves. She didn't. She lasted all of them. She controlled every square like she'd been here before, like she never really left." A pause in the paragraph, then it continued. "She didn't talk trash, didn't crack a joke, just moved, quiet, clean. By the time Mark realized what was happening, it was already over. And when she said checkmate, I swear, I forgot to breathe." The tone shifted in the last part, more thoughtful, less shaken. It wasn't just the win. It was the way she didn't need anyone to notice. The way she played like the game mattered more than the people watching. Like she was playing the board, not the crowd. Like she was finishing something she started a long time ago. The final words were simple, but they didn't need decoration. "I used to think real players had gear, followers, a name. But now, I look for the quiet ones. The ones who let the board do the talking. The ones who make silence feel heavy." Below the post, dozens replied. A few asked if she had a channel, or if it was really her. But one just said, "I was there. You're right." Another whispered into the thread with the only question that ever mattered. Was her name Eleanor? No one answered. They didn't need to. Because now, everyone was watching more closely. And that was enough. Because something in all of us had shifted, just a little. Enough to never look at a stranger the same way again.